Dang.
almost like a
Dang.
muffling.
Maybe I gotta talk closer to this. I gotta bring my mic closer to me. How about now?
That works great.
Okay. I'll just keep myself close to the mic.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
I
Yeah.
can hear you now.
Oh, you
Awesome.
sound great.
Cool. My bad, guys. The mic was off. But the podcast is live. We got it started and it is on.
Uh-oh.
And it's all good. I kind of like it when the podcast starts mid-convo. It's got like an organic feel. But yeah, we're on. Welcome to the K podcast. We got the pop historian master over here. Want to give us a brief intro of yourself, my guy?
I go by Pop Historian online normally, but you can call me Tony if that's easier for you.
All right.
Welcome, Tony.
Tony.
And he has a YouTube channel called
The Pop Historian.
Pop Historian. Check him out on YouTube. He's got content over there which summarizes historical events in a easily digestible manner. He's got one on language, he's got one on paper, he's got one on video games. Really interesting. So, Tony, why don't you tell us how you got interested or passionate about history and give us a description of what your channel is about and what your goals are with
Yeah,
it.
so I've always been a big fan of history. I mean, even since I was a little kid, I think I first got into it. My family did a lot of like medieval reenactment. So if you've ever seen the guys doing the full metal fighting with like swords and shields, we kind of did the light version of that,
Oh,
where they use like rattan sticks and whatnot. After kind of doing that for a couple of years, it's always just been something I've been fascinated by. And I think as I've gotten older, I've really wanted to pursue a more serious side of it. I'm looking at getting my master's degree in history. And then with the channel, I was hoping that I would have the opportunity to really pursue those interests in a little bit more of a semi-casual way. My goal has been I want to make documentaries, say like an hour long by the end. Now I am hitting about 15 minutes a piece. And I'm finally starting to hit that point where it's actually coming out with better quality. Actually trying to use some video, trying to pay attention to my audio, and I really just focus on something that I find interesting throughout history, and I'll cover it in 10 to 15 minutes. I got one about raccoons, but the one I'm doing about right now is actually the history of writing, kind of where it came from,
Yep.
the different. I'm focusing on the surfaces rather than the inks, and just really trying to give a good background without getting too far deep into the weeds.
Tony, do you have a cam by any chance you could put on?
It's gonna probably kick me off if I use it, unfortunately.
It's all good. The audio is perfect, so we'll just run with it.
Oh, perfect.
So, do you play any video games?
Oh man, I love video games. Okay, so for a long time, I'm big into the kind of 4X strategy games. I was big into Civilization for a long time, but I had to stop at Civ 4. I say that's the best Civ game because you can put as many units you want on a single tile, and I think just after they changed that rule, it completely destroyed the game. But over the past couple of years, I've been playing a lot of Stellaris, which is that same sort of thing, except it's in space. You build up your space civilization, and you go out, and you got to conquer the rest of the galaxy, is the idea. And that's really what I've been doing a lot of recently.
Wow.
Have you played Assassin's Creed by any chance?
Oh, Assassin's Creed is great. Are you kidding me? I played the first one when it came out. I mean, I got so many thoughts about Assassin's Creed. I don't want to get into it right now.
Well, too bad, my guy. We're going down the rabbit hole. Assassin's Creed's what really, really got me into history. I was already interested in it because I had a history professor in middle school that would have us reenact the ancient and historical battles that we were going over at the time. So he would lay out prop weapons and split the class up on one side and the other on the other, obviously. And we would represent each side of the opposing forces in the war, and we would duke it out. And after the battle, he would kind of tell us what happened and what was at stake. And that got me interested in history, but it wasn't up until I played the first three where I was balls deep into Assassin's Creed and in history. So as a historian, I've always wondered and I've always wanted to ask which parts of it were accurate and which parts of the game were kind of just bullshit.
Ooh, that's you. You put me in a weird spot. So one of the big things is that I typically would consider myself a general historian. I do have my areas of expertise. A little bit more familiar with Roman and medieval era history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the a lot of what I've learned to do is study the original text and kind of try to interpret that and create a narrative that makes sense when reading it, rather than learning all the details of what might be real or what might not be. And really, I think that's one of the biggest benefits of using video games as a teaching tool is they can get people really excited about a subject, kind of like what you were saying, in a way that reading or sometimes even reenacting can't do in quite the same light. It can bring these really cool concepts out to a lot of people in a way that's easily accessible, ways that they can pick it up. And I really, really wish there were more research and more studies done on the long-term effects of the passions that these would enable. I was reading a piece the other day that was specifically about Rome Total War and how Rome Total War got a bunch of people into wanting to study history, wanted to be passionate about history. And I just think that focusing on that, focusing on the bigger things about this is the way that kind of the world works, rather than the details of. I remember one of the big things for the original Assassin's Creed was they got rid of the crossbow because the crossbow wasn't historically accurate.
Yep.
I think that especially if you're in video games, when you're jumping around and you're playing a Knight Templar, stabbing guys, or when you're playing the assassins trying to get to the bad guys, I think you could take some historical liberties. I think the bigger idea is, get people excited about this, get people exposed to new ideas and new kind of ways of thinking, even that can really propel them to want to learn about this on their own.
Right. I think it's pretty accurate for you to say that about how Assassin's Creed could be like a bridge to have people curious about the history it's based on. Sorry. And I actually just recently started playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Yes.
And my lady, she's super into history and like all the Greek mythology and all that. So I ended up diving into looking into the whole Norse mythology, and it's pretty epic. And then I get into the brutal parts, like how they torture people, and I was like, this is insane.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like my favorite game, man. I would get so into it. I would go up to the viewpoints, the eagle points, and it'd give you a bird's eye view of the location, and I would go visit those historical sites and read about it. I was super into it.
That's actually a perfect example of one of the ways that technology games can be used in education. That's one of the things that they're really trying to push now with the Facebook Meta, is that you can get essentially a walking tour of these historical sites with a guide who is supposed to break down place by place where they are. Yeah, I mean, that's 100%. You hit it right on the head with that.
That's awesome. I mean, as a person who went down the rabbit hole of history because of Assassin's Creed, I would say using technology to immerse somebody is very effective as a person, as a target.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, for me in high school, like I liked the idea of learning history. I just didn't. I never really had a good teacher. I guess I could say, like, it was always a boring teacher, and I was always curious to learn about history, but it was always like a snooze fest every time I get to that class. But like you guys are saying, the video games, it's about captivating your attention in the right way, and I feel like everyone is willing to learn something if you put it in a way they're willing to listen to it. And for me, video games is one way where I'll sit there and it's like, I actually want to learn about this. Like I said, I looked up the whole Norse mythology, and I actually got sucked in that for a little while. And I was, from there, I was just diving. And, I just feel like, yeah, video games, as they're getting a lot of flack for whatever it is, but if people can use it also as a teaching tool, I think it'd be very effective for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think everybody can relate to having a boring history class. That's one of the reasons that I've been focusing on trying to create, some sort of a documentary, something that people will actually listen to, rather than just another boring, oh, this is what happened, and then this is what happened. I think we get too often bogged in the weeds of dates and the names of who might be the great people that are already written down, and tend to less focus on the ideas of what was the time really like, what were these things about, and relating it especially on a very human level that classrooms often don't have the equipment or training or intention of doing so.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think for me, when it comes to history, it's like you said, like everyone has the ideas, like, oh, I've had a boring teacher. But for me, the whole part of learning history was because I wanted to know what that world was like. That's always been the interesting part for me, because looking at now everything we have nowadays, we have it easy. And I like to tell people that, like, we have it easy. Just, I know I probably didn't pay attention as much in history class, but there's a lot of things where I look at now, it's like, wow, we are lucky. And that's like that's the most interesting part about history, is just learning, hey, it was like this, and just to learn how we progress from that is even more interesting for me. And I did dive onto your channel a little bit too when I had the chance, and I was actually interested in listening how you were presenting it. It was actually something I was willing to listen to.
And as far as being curious about what time was like back in the day and what things were like then, I feel like that's a primal curiosity that we were born with. I mean, like as a kid, I know I was, and I mean, let me know if you agree or not. I was into dinosaurs. I was super into dinosaurs.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yep. Oh, for sure.
And like wondering what
I think the
things
crazy
were
part
like.
is when they say how these dinosaurs, we're probably not even close to how we're sketching them out. They might look a lot different, because all we have that we're basing off of are those their remains. But a lot of people are saying we don't know how they actually look, and I think that's the part that blows my mind. Is like, we may think it's this, but we'll never know, and that's crazy to me.
Yeah, man. Some people think the brontosaurus's neck was way up, but no, realistically, it might have just been horizontal. Even though we draw these mother lovers just with their necks up.
I heard that wasn't even their necks that we were looking at, if you know what I'm saying.
I mean, he's blessed.
You thought that was a tail.
You thought the T-Rex was the baddest man here?
So, Tony, this might not be your area of expertise, but I'm curious, man. What do you think about dinosaurs? Feathers or no feathers? Tell us.
As far as I know, the big reason that feathers are being taken more seriously is because they've developed new technologies to look deeper and deeper at the fossils. I think we've been talking about feathers for the past 30, 40 years at this point. I'm going to go with feathers. It's kind of like when they said that Pluto's not a planet. Pluto's not a planet anymore. They got feathers.
Feathers, baby.
It's crazy because you think they got feathers and you try to picture that. Like, that kind of looks creepy now, Like, how much creepier can these dinosaurs get? Let's put some feathers on them.
Like,
there's this
Jurassic Park was wrong.
Chicken dinosaurs.
There's this great book. I want to say it's called All Yesterdays. And what they do is they take it from the perspective of an alien biologist, like a million years in the future, looking through the fossils of Earth and trying to sketch out the different animals that they find, using the same techniques that we use to try to discover what a dinosaur looks like. And you'll see these animals, like my favorite one is the goose, because it's got just this massive long neck and it looks like a monster. And once you throw the feathers and kind of like the fat on it, it just looks like this big squishy bird. But without that context, like you don't get it whatsoever. And I think it's a really insightful opportunity to kind of change your perspective on how we view fossils with dinosaurs.
Sounds like a good read.
Oh,
that's such a trip. Imagine finding goose fossils without the idea of what a goose actually looks like.
Yeah. All that other stuff just melted away. So
Fucking
what do we really know?
kangaroo giraffe. Yo, Tony, I wanted to ask, since you mentioned the metaverse and Assassin's Creed using technology to make history more appealing, I don't think it's far off till metaverse makes a digital set to fully immerse you into certain time periods. I'm talking about like a virtual time machine, you know, where the sky looks the same as it did back then based on the atmospheric conditions. The textures of the building and the architecture is pretty on point, and even what people look like. So wanted to ask you, is there a certain time period that you would like to visit if one of those things were actually made?
Is there a time period I'd like to visit?
With a time machine or something?
Man, I don't know. That is such a good question. I've never been asked that before.
Welcome to the K podcast, baby.
Dude, I want to check out the 80s if I could. I don't know, something weird about that decade.
Oh, yeah, that'd be nice. I don't know. I think I'm going to go basic here. I'm going to say Pompeii. I just think that'd be really
epic,
interesting. I think people would spend a lot of time trying to make it look as realistic as possible, and I don't know. I think that'd just be fun to visit.
right?
In a place that you can't really recreate, because you can try to recreate. You might have been like an old colonial village or whatnot, or like with the medieval reenactment. As much as you try to do that, you're never going to be able to recreate. Okay.
Right. I think it'd be cool to just immerse yourself in that metaverse and then be there. It's like, okay, I want to be here right before Pompeii. Before everything comes down. I just want to stand in the middle of it.
Dip out.
And I'm out of here.
Of course, they have a game over screen for that, I bet.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it was accurate. I don't know if you guys, well, you probably do. There was like these pictures of people's like skeletal remains, I guess, from Pompeii, and how like they were like having sex or whatever. I was like, I don't know if that's real.
So, yeah, Pompeii I can't remember exactly when it was, about 79 AD. It was a big pleasure town, and we know that because everything has been kept in place. Like, we know so much about the layout of like Roman cities at the time. We see like graffiti on the walls, like people etched in like "I was here," the same thing that you'd see today with like a picture of a dick right next to it. And it's I believe that 100%. Because
Really?
you also see so many of these I think it's actual castings. I think it's carbon castings of the individuals, which is actually how they founded Pompeii, was that miners kept running into these massive holes, and there were people there. So I know that they put in plaster to get those, but I 100% believe that there was somebody in their final moments that said, you know what, let's just go do it.
Yeah. That's the right term. It wasn't skeletal, but like the carbon castings. And I remember looking at those pictures, like I was like, are you serious? Like these two, here comes the volcano, let's bang real quick.
I mean, at that point in time, it's like a meteor striking the earth. You just gotta have one last good one.
Yeah, right. Not a terrible way to go out, I guess.
People would do that in Vegas 100%, though, Gary.
Yeah. Because the volcano hit Vegas. Ooh.
Where did this volcano come from?
Treasure Island.
It was Dr. Evil drilling the center of the earth.
Oh,
There's not even a volcano.
yeah.
Yeah, so Tony, me and the guys over here, we actually used to rap. Or still kind of do, kind of dabble. But me, I used to be super obsessed with like ancient Egypt lore and mythology. I wanted to make an album or a mixtape called Language, based on like hieroglyphics and stuff. Jermaine knows, he helped me with the album cover or whatnot. But your video on cuneiform and clay tablets, that stuff is crazy, man. I mean, who would have thought that technology at the time was very ingenious, pretty much indestructible. During fires, it would heat up, and when there's floods and stuff, it'd be cool underwater. So why don't you just kind of go down that lane and talk about how advanced cuneiform and clay tablets
Yeah,
actually
so
are?
they were clay tablets. Have you ever in school, would it be like fourth or fifth grade, make like a cup in like an art class?
Like pottery?
Like pottery.
Like pottery.
Yeah.
I think so.
You
I
ever,
can't
you ever
remember.
take one of those before it goes in the kiln and throw them in the water?
No.
It's just mud and it falls apart. If you were to go out right now and buy some clay and make like a little cup out of it, and it's not going to be able to hold water. It's going to fall apart back into the dirt. That's how clay is recycled. So what happens is when you apply heat to it, then it solidifies. There's an actual change within the physical nature of the clay. The atoms realign, and it becomes a solid piece of rock.
It's crazy.
So what happens is if there was a fire, say there was an accidental fire, somebody leaves a cooking pot unkept and oil goes everywhere and it burns down a library. Well, nowadays, if it burns down a library, all the paper is going to be gone.
Yep.
Back then, when they utilized those clay tablets, even if they hadn't been fired yet, well, then they're going to be fired. So you're either going to save this for a long period of time for like tax records or whatever, because it's important, or you keep a library of these documents that are temporary. You're going to keep them for like a year or a couple of years or until you need to make space. Well, then it burns down and all that stuff is preserved. And you don't really have that with papyrus and parchment and paper.
Now, with all that considered, Tony, as a historian, how do you feel about the modern day record keeping of pretty much everything being uploaded to the cloud and everything being digital? Wouldn't you say that would be a liability
So it's
or
going to be really
fragile way of?
So
record
I'd say
keeping?
yes and no. So I professionally work in IT. I've worked in IT for over a decade at this point. And I got to say that digital storage is perhaps the best and worst thing when it comes to document preservation. Best in the sense that you have unfettered, unlimited access to some of the rarest books in the world right now. Literally, you can go on, Project Gutenberg is one of them, where they single-handedly will scan books page by page, put them online, free for anybody to look at them. And these are ancient documents. So I'm working on the part 2 of that video right now. I'll really start to talk about papyrus. I talked to one of the head librarians over at the University of Michigan for their papyrus collection, and he's like, yeah, we have all of these papyrus documents all on the cloud. You can download them right there. The problem is that these documents, all of these documents need to maintain some sort of a physical form in order to ensure that they're going to be maintained properly for decades and decades and decades to come, with this massive amount of information coming in. Because we're not just talking about things from thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago that are historical documents. Think about everything on the internet. More information is being produced every day or every week than there was in all of human history before 2008. I mean, that is an information overload at a level that is truly unfathomable, even to, I guess, really a modern understanding. So what the big problems that we're going to have going forward in the future is looking online, trying to find that information. You suddenly go from too few sources to way too many, and trying to determine really which one is correct and which one is not correct, because you have so much information to pull from that you could potentially make an argument each way. There was a really good example of that in a really bizarre place. I was watching this video about Garfield recently. Garfield the cat, the comic strip. And it was like a 2-hour long video. I think it was a Super Eye Patch Wolf And he's talking about how he goes through all of these Garfield comics. And he goes, and then I looked at the end of the amount that I looked through, and it was only about 8% of Garfield comics. And he had looked at like 1,000. And that's the problem that we're going to get. You know, that 8% of Garfield comics is not indicative of all of Garfield. So I think by that same token, we're going to get too much information to be able to go through, and we're going to get bad conclusions as a result of that, because you simply can't research at the level that information is being produced.
That's nuts, man. I feel like we're dealing with
yeah, I was thinking about that. Like, as time progresses, we're gonna have, yeah, like you said, that much more data, and that much more music, that much more artwork, and then when all that time passes, like, what is gonna stand the test of time? What events are gonna end up in textbooks? What is gonna be considered the greatest? That's what boggles my mind. Of like, I don't even know if kids know who Eddie Murphy is anymore. And like 200 years from now, I wonder if people will know who Michael Jackson is. Like, he might just be, maybe he will, but I don't know. Maybe he might just get lost in time. I'd hope not. There's just so much content now.
It's actually crazy that you say that, because I heard that in the state that music is in, specifically hip hop, well, actually everything now, with sampling, I heard someone say that with sampling, there's so many samples right now, and there's samples of samples of samples of samples, that you won't even know what the original song actually is anymore, because the original song will be a sampled song of that, which is pretty much sample overload. And it's interesting because personally, I believe that we're already dealing with this information overload, so I can't even imagine what this problem will look like in the future. And that's kind of what, I mean, that breeds the grounds for disinformation and information bias, wouldn't you say? So with all this information overload and disinformation, how would you coach someone to go about doing accurate research about history in the midst of all this propaganda and disinformation?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is understanding how deep you want to go into this. If you want to kind of, like what I'm doing, is essentially writing 10 to 15 pages on it, that's going to be a different process. And you're going to want to go through either legitimate academic sources, sources provided by reputable organizations such as Project Gutenberg, if you're trying to get one of those original books. Library of Congress has a massive collection of newspapers from all over the US dating back to the 1700s. So that's one avenue. And really, if you're trying to do that, that's going to be more of like when you're looking at college level territory. If you're looking more for a casual understanding, I think it's important to understand that while Wikipedia is a good first place to look, you know, to just kind of get a basic understanding of what's going on, it shouldn't be your only method of trying to gather that information. And that's not because, Wikipedia is wrong or anything like that. I've found very rarely is it wrong. I mean, I have a couple examples that I can point to, but it gets by and large most of the information right. The problem is that it's going to be pretty biased one way or another. Anytime you're reading about something social studies based, whether it be history, whether it be the study of a culture or a people, a human being wrote that. Even if it's machine learning, the machine is learning by reading human examples. So that person is going to have a bias one way or another. They might say, well, this is a really good thing or this is a really bad thing. And they're going to write in accordance with that. They're also going to say that certain things are more and less important than others. You're going to want to make sure that this is something that is regularly cited and not just popular. You do have a lot of more the popular sources that are available. One of the big things that I think, especially when discussing disinformation, that you're going to want to keep out for is making sure that this is not one of those fringe beliefs or like a cult kind of belief. I think there's a very fine line for a lot of people between doing their research and reading, 1,000 pages of ideas that, that Rome isn't real or whatnot, or going onto TikTok and browsing down all the different sort of bad historical archaeology proving that aliens existed. I think you really need to take a look at things with a very skeptic mind and really ask yourself, was this humans? And is there a legitimate reason why other more reputable sources or more popular sources or more accepted sources might be lying about this? Because let me tell you, if we found Atlantis, the guy who finds Atlantis is going down in the history books for the rest of time. One of the big things was, the War of Troy for a long time was not thought to be real. Troy was thought to be a myth. And there was not Helen of Troy and Achilles and all these great people. And that these were just Greek myths. Well, they actually found a city of Troy. The problem was that the guy who found it got about 95% of everything wrong. I mean, he used dynamite to break through the levels of the city, destroying who knows how much. He got so much wrong, but he got one thing right, and it was that this was a real thing. So I guess why would with so much on the line, why would everybody continuously lie about this when you have so much that you can gain from just telling the truth?
So I heard this dude on a podcast talking about how history is written by the winners of the wars, right? And with propaganda being at an all-time high, what he does is he doesn't subscribe to any history or any articles written post World War One. And with the propaganda being at an all-time high, he feels like any information put out is disinformation propaganda. How do you feel about that and that mindset?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is there needs to be a kind of separation on this understanding of history. There needs to be a difference of like academic history and pop history. I kind of do more of like the pop history stuff on my side because I'm not presenting people with, this is an academic journal and you need to read 30 pages on this theory to get it. That's going to be a lot more of, I think when people say that history is modified and changed, they're talking more about the pop history. If I would say that using only sources before a certain period of time could potentially be worthwhile depending on what you're trying to do. If you're looking at a primary source, which is something written at the time about the event or written by somebody who was at the event, like, if I were to talk about my experience, working in IT, that's a primary source 20 years from now or 100 years from now. I'm talking about things as they're happening. I might not be right, but that's what my point of view is. If you're looking at a secondary source, what a secondary source is, again, that's what a lot of pop history is. It's talking about events in the past. It's talking about something that happened a while back from somebody who wasn't there using sources that were there. A secondary source might take a bunch of those different newspaper articles and determine, this is what happened. Because even though 4 newspapers reported on it slightly differently, one of them is going to get something wrong, one of them is going to make up something, and then one of them is going to just have like a little blurb with all the right information that matches up with the other ones. So I think that if you're a historian only using secondary sources and history books from before World War I, then I think you're a really bad historian because you refuse to acknowledge the decades and decades of work that individuals have put forth trying to understand these things. You're ignoring the fact that, there's literally a century of work which has opened up so many new avenues for research. You're ignoring probably all the archaeological finds that have completely changed our understanding of history. You know, think about the Vikings and Native Americans. 20, 30 years ago, that was a fringe occult belief. That's like, oh, who would think that? Now, like, we're 100% certain that in these years, there were Vikings in North America. Only using primary sources, well, then again, it depends on what you're studying. If you're looking at the Middle Ages, then yeah, you're only going to use primary sources during the Middle Ages.
That's interesting because I always believed in that philosophy of a good student can learn from any teacher or from anything, so to speak. So you're saying that you should be able to take in any information with an open mind, but at the same time have a skeptical mindset as far as implementing that into your philosophy and your belief. Is that what you're trying to say?
Wouldn't say that. I would say that there are some things that you have to recognize aren't worth diving any deeper into. And I think that it's important to keep a skeptical mindset when trying to determine which ones those are, because even, you know, before the age of the internet, there was still a whole bunch of crap being pushed out. And if you're not able to think critically about this, if you're not able to look at this skeptically and say, was it this? Was it really that? Then I think you're going to fall down a lot of traps designed to catch people who don't ask those questions.
Interesting.
So just kind of going back to what you're saying about how like the Vikings and like Indians were kind of like a cultish kind of viewpoint at one point. Nowadays, I guess the most intriguing part for me is still, like, you know, obviously aliens. There's always been some claims that aliens have always been a part of our history at some point, and a lot of people like to debunk that and say that's not true. Like, and that's kind of touching the whole cultish thing. Like, I believe there's some cases where we've been in contact with them. We don't know for sure what it was. So, from what you know with history, what could you say that is something that's plausible, and what is something that, you know, is complete just bullshit?
Are you saying like with aliens specifically, or?
Yeah, like with the history of like how there's so many claims that, oh, they built the pyramids, they did all of, you know, like things like that. What is something you could say for in your own opinion that you would say is plausible, and something that's just not even worth linking aliens to and wasting your time going down that hole?
So I'll say this with aliens is that aliens are typically given as an excuse to explain away the creations of people who are seen as less than, and who's seen as not having the mental capability to develop complex societies, develop complex systems for building architecture, whether that be in Egypt or in the with the Mayans and the Aztecs in Mexico, or the Incans in Peru. You don't see too many claims about aliens building Oxford Cathedral, which was the tallest building for several hundred years, taller than the pyramids. And I think my biggest problem with it is that every time aliens are brought into this kind of conversation, as aliens put down this technology, more and more times we're seeing potential solutions that humans could have come up with to put those things in place, or to design those things. Are there aliens? I mean, there's too many stars and too many planets, I think, for there not to be aliens. Have we had contact with aliens? I haven't seen any aliens. Maybe they just don't like me. I don't know. I mean, it's entirely possible that aliens, have been influencing culture for thousands of years. But every single time they're really brought up in conversation, it's to really get an easy way out for a very complicated answer that we might not have fully at the moment.
So they're like fillers, you would say. Aliens are fillers.
Just fillers.
Yeah. they're really for filling in the blank until we can prove it, and they're used for a lot of people to kind of show that something else is happening behind the scenes that people aren't figuring out or people are lying about, and I'm going to be able to figure this out. I think they're a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong, but it's every time that you really look deep into it, it is not explained away. I think there's more plausible theories, and there's more examples of this work being done in other parts of the world.
Right. Yeah. See, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me because, like, a lot of times when you hear, like, the History Channel, you see that meme of that guy with the messy hair is always saying aliens, right? That's like very relatable to this. Like, people just like, aliens did it. Yeah, I don't know, aliens. So
They
I
did.
think that's a great way to explain that. But there were instances where at one point where I was like, that could be true. Hey, aliens could have done that.
Oh, absolutely.
And how they say that the pyramids were lined up for the stars, and that was a way for them to find their way around. I was like, really? Like, they got to use that? They're so advanced. They got to use the pyramids to find their way around.
Well, no. You know what they came down for? They came down to have sex with humans. That was
How hard about
that's
that
it.
one?
Yo.
Or sex with apes or whatever.
Hey, you know what? I don't know what aliens look like. They might be into that.
Nothing wrong with that.
Or I might be into them. You know what I'm saying?
Power
Next evolution.
Can you shapeshift for me real quick?
I mean, I can, but my camera's off, so you're not going to see it.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
what
We're talking with an alien this whole time.
Imagine.
Deflect.
Well, Tony, I wanted to ask you about the Library of Alexandria. I read a lot about valuable historical books and irreplaceable information lost in that fire. Can you just go over what was lost in that fire of Alexandria in the library?
Yeah, so the Library of Alexandria, just for a little bit of background, whoever might not know it, was this great big library that was in Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria, Egypt was founded by Alexander the Great. It was one of the many cities that he named after himself. It sits, right on the coast of Egypt, right around the Nile River. The big thing is that the burning of the Library of Alexandria of Egypt is often in pop culture said as this big thing that we lost, millions of books. Now, what they would do is in the library, or when you would say, because Alexandria was a big port city, so you bring in with a port, they have people get on the boat, look around, see what you're trying to sell. And if you had any books, what they do is they take the book, they would make a copy of it, give you the copy, which was often a really bad copy, and then keep the original book. So they amassed thousands and thousands and thousands of books at a time when these things were really, really expensive, really hard to get by. Everything had to be done by hand. So did they lose a whole bunch of irreplaceable information? Absolutely, 100%. But I also think that it's important to understand that the Library of Alexandria was burnt multiple times. There were multiple different burnings. There was the one, quote unquote, the burning by the barbarians, which happened like 2 or 3 times. It was burnt in part of it was burnt by Julius Caesar. And the library didn't fall all apart at once. It came in stages. And I think really by the end of it, there was a loss of information. I wouldn't say irreplaceable, because we do see a lot of this information being kept by different Muslim groups throughout the Middle East, and into Andalusia, modern day Spain, and throughout North Africa. That information did stay. It didn't stay in the Western world as we really track it chronologically. It stayed within the Muslim world during that time. There were absolutely irreplaceable artifacts that we'll never get back. But I think you're always going to get that lossage when you're talking about paper or paper-like documents. I know for most papyrus that we found, it's been a very small strip of land in between the Nile River and the desert in places where people used to live, but they don't anymore. So like you have a shoebox in the back of your closet that has important documents and maybe like some letters or maybe some receipts or whatever. That's a lot of what we've found over the years for papyrus documents is those shoe boxes in the back of closets in little villages in Egypt.
Damn. That's interesting. I don't think a lot of people knew that the library was burned multiple times. Would you happen to know how many times it was burned and how long in between those fires? How much time transpired in between those fires?
So I can't speak to that specifically. I would know that. So what you need to understand is ancient Egypt was about 3,000 years long.
Mm-hmm.
More time passed between the beginning and end of ancient Egypt than the end of ancient Egypt and right now.
It's fucking crazy, right?
Alexandria was pretty late in the game. So I'm not really an Egyptologist, so I'd be a little bit hesitant to talk about that. I'm pretty sure that Alexandria, at least in part, had this library or this consortium of knowledge, this university, whatever it might be, before then. And then it was incorporated when Alexandria was officially declared, quote unquote, a city, because you don't typically just plop down with 100,000 people. Typically, there's already people there. And I would definitely say that, it happened probably over 1,000 years in bits and stages, because I think that really it ended with Christianity really taking over a lot of the different areas and trying to push out some older ideas.
So I wanted to ask you actually personally about, because there was something that I was interested in. It was the Pax Romana.
Yeah.
One thing that intrigued me was the fact that they were so advanced. They had so much innovations that are still used to this day, like the postal system, which I didn't know that's where it came from. So I would ask you, from what you know, it's what are we still using that came from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I think is probably the most important thing that we're still using from the Romans are a lot of the smaller inventions that come with things like carpentry and architecture that were used for easily thousands of years. I think that so often, we'll get caught up in things like the postal system, which developed independently in other areas as well. The Mongolians had an amazing courier system. You could get a letter from, the shores of China to Baghdad in a week, 2 weeks by horse, which was unheard of at the time. And you had courier systems, throughout the Incan Empire. But I think those little small inventions, those tiny things that you kind of don't even think about anymore, aren't even properly or probably used nearly as much, but were absolutely vital for industry and really enabled just this massive explosion of capabilities and knowledge that without those smaller inventions, without people laying bricks, without people properly using farming systems, that we wouldn't have the capacity for so much more that we have today.
Oh. And I think the funny part was, I might be wrong, but Pax Romana was kind of Latin for Roman peace, right? But I think remembering it wasn't necessarily peaceful, right? There was plenty of wars because of the expansion, maybe, or militarism.
Yeah. So the really Pax Romanum, you're going to have to ask somebody else a little bit more detail on what exactly that involves.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I could talk about it a bit. I don't really talk about Pax Romanum as much.
Okay.
But I do know that by the time that really came around in the 100, 200 AD, second, third century AD era, you did have a massive change in the way the military worked. Before then, I can't remember the exact date. I want to say it was about 100 BC. You would buy all your own armor, you'd buy all your own equipment, and you'd go marching off to war with your buddies. You, and if you owned land, then you and your brother and your dad and everybody would be okay, we're going to buy our armor and weapons as we can afford them. And there were specific laws dictating if you made this much money, you had to have this equipment. So like that's one of the big reasons that horsemen were rare, especially in like the early Roman empires, because horses are expensive. Those laws aren't unusual throughout history. You see them again pop up in the Middle Ages, especially like with knights. You see them with samurai. All sorts of different, really organized, militarized groups. What you have after with the Roman legions is there were a number of serious reforms made, and it was suddenly anybody can join. I believe it's if you're a Roman citizen, anybody can join the military. And that's a big deal. That's where you get the 25 years of service. That's when you get Julius Caesar's legions marching across Gaul. And that's really where you get I think one of the big selling points behind Pax Romanum and the conquering of new land, because the idea was you are going to do this for 25 years and you're going to be given a small plot of land afterwards. And that was the dream. Think about it these days in the U.S., white picket fence, 2.5 kids. The problem is that you had to constantly be getting more and more land because you've already promised it to millions of young men who want to become Roman.
That's interesting. That's the first time I've ever heard of Pax Romana. Can you just kind of tell us what it is briefly?
I believe it's Pax Romana. I believe, like you said, it's a Roman peace. Yes. The idea was peace within the empire. There wasn't really peace within the empire. Rome had the Roman Empire by this point in time had a massive slave population. You might have heard of Spartacus. I am Spartacus. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I see you shaking your head. There were slave uprisings. I mean, there was, for example, there was the Masada with the Jewish uprising shortly, I want to say about 70 AD, where they just did massacre after massacre. There was peace relative to, I guess, what came before, but there was brutality at a scale that for many people hadn't existed prior.
That's crazy. So I wanted to get into Halloween and the origins of that. But I'm curious, since we're talking about Romans and all that, would you know what the most historically accurate movie about Rome would be or is? I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm going to have to defer this one to a different YouTube channel. There's a YouTube channel called History Buffs. And what this guy does is he just goes through different historical media piece by piece by piece. And he has a couple about different pieces of Roman media. I think the one he suggests is the TV series Rome. I believe he said that was pretty good. And he has watched a lot more of that stuff than I have. What I can tell you is that movies often get it wrong, but there could still be really good movies even if they get it wrong.
I have to check them out. You said History Buffs? History Buffs?
History Buffs.
Okay.
Buffs. It's got a little animated blonde British guy. And he does about 40 minutes to like 2 hours. And he's really does it well. It's really well done, I gotta say. You need to watch his one on Braveheart, because he handles Braveheart so much better than I could.
I actually haven't seen Braveheart, believe it or not. So judge me. Judge me.
Mel Gibson,
it's a long movie, man. It's a long movie.
Mel Gibson makes probably the least historically accurate movies of all time, and I think that's really? The common consensus.
That's interesting. So Passion of the Christ isn't historically accurate? Damn.
I've never seen Passion of the Christ.
Oh. Sounds like Christian propaganda then, huh?
Like, is this Mel Gibson just...
It's probably Christian propaganda. Right?
Yeah, totally.
Damn.
It was kind of hard to watch it, too, after he went on his, like, anti-Semitic stuff. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. Now, my buddy had a great joke about that. He was like, Mel Gibson is a great actor in that he convinced people for over 20 years that he wasn't racist or something like that. What a guy.
That guy. Well, Tony, I wanted to ask you about Halloween since this podcast is coming out in October.
Okay.
Do you mind just kind of going into the origins and how it evolved to what it is right now?
Oh yeah, I was just going to make some crap of it first. No, so it does come from older pagan holidays. That's the short and skinny of it. I'm not going to go too deep into those, just simply because I don't think they really apply as much in modern Halloween. Modern Halloween, how we see it in the U.S. at least, really came over as the result of that tradition in Ireland with the Great Potato Famine. Great Potato Famine, for those of you who don't know, about 1850, there was a potato blight in Ireland, across much of Europe, actually. And instead of helping the people, a lot of the British government said, well, no, we're going to still export the food that you normally get, and you're going to have to find another way to feed yourselves. So because of that, population of Ireland massively declined, not only because people couldn't eat and they were getting disease, but because they left. A lot of them came to the United States. Massive population boom, 1850s and such. That's why we have so many Irish people living in the U.S. With that, they brought their traditions. One of them was a harvest festival that they would have at the end of harvest. A lot of different cultures had different harvest festivals. You know, we might have like Thanksgiving, where you get all the food together and you're going to eat all of it and you're going to have like a great time, and you know, you're going to kill this great big animal. And I think they would do traditionally a cow. So that's really where it started to pick up, and it started up until like the 1920s as like a night of mischief making. Like you'd go around, you'd vandalize some things, like you'd like rob a house or whatever, and it's just like all in good fun, you know, just having a good time. And then really what we see for modern Halloween really starts to pick up after the Second World War. You have this really interesting culture change after the Second World War where a lot of industrialization starts to happen on a level that allows for a certain number of people to kind of live in the suburbs. And there's really a big emphasis on the family, big emphasis on kids. And kids start going door to door really for candy. And there's some mentions of it earlier, but you did have the Great Depression, and so that really stopped things. And then, you know, the Second World War really put a damper on everybody's opinions. So that's really where we see it, is after the Second World War. Start buying scary masks, start dressing up in a lot more of a kind of like a silly fun way rather than like a scary, I'm going to burn down a house way.
So you're saying that Halloween used to be a night where people would put on scary, I'm going to burn down a house today type of masks to hide their identity than to be a character, which sounds like it would be a lot more creepier.
Oh, absolutely.
And wreak havoc, like the old school Purge almost. Kind of sounds like the Purge.
I wouldn't go that far. I'd say it'd be almost a little, I don't know. I would never really had like a haunting hour for Halloween. But if you ever like watched a movie or something and it's like, oh, it's past 12, it's when the big kids come out and they like throw toilet paper everywhere. I'd say it's kind of like that, only a little bit more extreme, where you could get away with a lot more stuff. You can get away with some vandalism. You can get away with some graffiti. There's no cameras anywhere. Yeah.
That's crazy. And then you're saying the timing of Halloween and the Day of the Dead, they just kind of fused the two holidays to make...
Yeah, so the Day of the Dead, I can't remember the specific day that it is. If anybody wants to look that up for me, I would really appreciate that. I want to say it's November 1st. Day of the Dead really goes back thousands of years in Mexico. The idea is recommuning with your ancestors, where... And it's over the years, it's changed drastically. Originally, it was, well, actually, I don't really know too much about it originally, so I'm not going to talk about that. What I do know is that after Christianization of Mexico, in Central America, these practices were brought in with Christianity. So it was really taken a lot of ways and changed very dramatically. Now you'd go to the cemetery where your ancestors are buried. You would make sure that they're kind of comfortable in the afterlife, where you'd provide them like with food or with candles. You'd say prayers, and I think it was intertwined with Halloween because of proximity and time of year, and because it's, I guess, viewed through the American lens of it being spooky rather than it being reverenced. Because anytime we interact with like dead things, that's scary, that's spooky, that's a cult, you know.
That's crazy. Day of the Dead is on November 1st.
It was November 1st.
Yeah, you were.
So yeah, it's the day after. So it's really set up in such a way, not intentionally, I believe, or probably actually intentionally, because you have Halloween and then All Hallows Eve. And then you have a couple other Christian holidays, specifically within Catholicism, that I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's a Feast of Saint Mary. I don't know. Somebody else can look that up.
That's crazy.
Yeah, just proximity, and because Americans think that it's spooky because it's dead, and it's also kind of fun. And I think that, along with the fact that there's a lot more Mexican Americans living in the U.S. now, means that those individuals have brought their culture, their traditions, and the things that they love and believe, and their way of honoring and respecting the people that came before them. I think it's a really beautiful thing. And I think that more cultures should be allowed socially to engage with the things that the celebrations that make them whole and connect them to the people that came before them.
That's nuts. I think it's such a trip that we kind of just took this concept from another culture and just kind of Disney-fied it. You know what I mean? Like you said, Day of the Dead, this is a time where people mourn or even honor their loved ones that passed away. But in the meantime, we're over here trying to look like Mickey Mouse and Spider-Man and shit, getting candy. That's kind of fucking up, man. I'm
not Hispanic, so I can only speak on it so much. Mm-hmm. I'd only be willing to speak about it so much without kind of being a part of that culture.
I know in the Philippines it's kind of like that. For Halloween, we celebrate the death, and that's how you spend Halloween out there. And it's just interesting how different cultures celebrate the day. And over here, it's about candy.
Yeah, I definitely think that in the U.S., in a lot of Western culture, we try to pretend that death doesn't exist. And I think that's because for a lot of people, it's scary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Understandably, but
yeah. I mean,
oh yeah, I fear it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those things you never know. And I was actually watching your video the other night of Buddy Holly.
Yeah.
Because like my lady like loves Buddy Holly and all that, so she had talked to me about it, and I saw your video. I was like, oh, this is great. So I showed it to her, and she actually really liked it. And I like how you touch how that even transcended into today, like with how Kobe Bryant's death was reported before even the family were notified. And that was just something I've always thought that was like, what, there's like no privacy when you're a celebrity anymore. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's really insane. So that's actually, I try not to dive too deep into it, but that is the example that I had found on Wikipedia. It was like the anniversary of his death, and somebody posted it on Reddit, and it was like, today I learned that, they did this and this and that. And I looked it up and I traced it back to the source, and I'm like, this is just a Time magazine article from 50 years after his death. There's no mention of changing the way that next of kin are notified after the death. So I dived deeper into it, and currently each different department throughout the United States, each different police department sets up their own procedures for next of kin notification. There's no laws handling it, the only time that you have any sort of federal intervention is when either somebody dies overseas or somebody dies in the military. And they do have very stringent death notification procedures. But other than that, I mean, literally the exact same thing happened with pretty much with Buddy Holly that did Kobe Bryant, is their deaths were reported by the news, who had no legal requirement to not do that. It was always considered to be much more of just like a general privacy sort of thing, a general concern and politeness. I mean, TMZ faced no legal backlash. They got pretty much no social backlash, other than I think one day of a bunch of tabloids coming up with it. And the people involved with the case are the sheriff's department, who broke their own procedures. They didn't break procedures based upon the state or on federal grounds. And I think it was the helicopter company.
That's so unreal.
Yeah. So yeah, the reason why I brought that up is because you touched on how in the United States, just how we handle death, like the news of death or the idea of death, and I feel like that's one way to show how we handle that idea of someone dying and just saying, you know what, this is news, let's tell everyone.
It's cloud.
Yeah.
Cloud, dude. It's crazy.
All right, Tony. One last question I had before we wrap things up. I remember you mentioned you played a lot of Civilization.
Yeah.
Did you hear about? Man, I'm trying to remember this properly. I think it was Civilization 3 where somebody like experimented running this.
Yeah,
like,
I know exactly what you're going for. I
you
know
know
100%. Oh.
Just like three, was it just three different like bots just playing against each other for like a straight, like, what is it? Was it 4 years worth of AI Civilization 3?
It was a couple years worth of AI Civilization, and they reached a point about 4000 AD. And it was this cool thing, and you can jump in at any point in time if you need to, where the AI literally lived in like this hyper militaristic dictatorship. Global warming had reached the point where they were like confined to tiny islands with like just a slave population, just constantly nuking each other and sending out tanks. And it is like the most dystopian, messed up vision of the future that is just perfectly encapsulated in like the zero-sum game where the only way you can win is by destroying other people.
Yeah, but like at the same time, there was it's at like peace. It's like at a stalemate, just a very dystopian stalemate, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's yeah.
Well, I hope we all survive that. I hope we survive.
I'll keep my fingers crossed.
If that's any indication of the future, I hope we all survive that. Thank you very much, the Pop Historian, for coming through. You want to plug any of your social media accounts? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so the only thing I'm going to be plugging tonight is my YouTube account. Once again, it's going to be the Pop Historian. If you get me on YouTube, I'm going to be the one without Red Dead Redemption gameplay.
I saw that other one. That was weird.
Yeah. It was. I came up with all the info about it for myself, and then about 4 months in, found out that guy existed, and that's not me. I got the little popcorn bucket. I got the cute little videos about history. So that's really what I'm going for right now, and looking at starting a TikTok in the future, getting in on that money.
That's the way to go.
Let's go.
Yeah. I'm going to do the
Alright.
sexy dances.
Is there another video you're working on that people could look forward to that you're going to be uploading soon to your channel?
Great question. Yes, there is. So I did previously the part 1 for the history of writing. Talked about a little bit at the beginning. Cuneiform tablets, things that broke. I'm going to be doing part 2 coming out probably within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And it's going to cover paper alternatives, papyrus, that sort of stuff. One of the most interesting things that I come across is the use of birch bark, like you find on trees. And that is used consistently from the Romans. There were a lot of writings from a small child that drew pictures of him and his dad riding on horses, being knights, from about the 1300s. Very cute. and then even by Soviet prisoners. And I really dive into that a little bit deeper. And I talked to a couple experts on papyrus actually about it a little bit more in depth. So if you like ancient Egypt, that'll be the perfect thing. Talk about the Book of the Dead a little, and going to finish that series out strong with paper, and that'll come in a couple months.
All right.
That's awesome.
Look forward to that. Well, thank you again for coming on. I hope we didn't keep you too long.
Oh no, this was a great podcast. You can keep me for another hour if you really want to.
Well, we definitely would like to have you on another time and maybe have an update on you and maybe more things we could talk about. But I feel like there's a lot left unsaid still, but I think that's perfect to leave on for another time.
That was a great closing out statement. That was beautiful. I love that.
Thank you. It just came to me, but yeah. Thank you again. We hope to catch you next time, and everyone, please look up the Pop Historian on YouTube. He has the popcorn icon, not the Red Dead Redemption gameplay. All right. Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Thank you very much. See you when I see you.
All right.
Peace out.